you're muted. You need to, let me see if I can, I'll unmute you. There we go. Okay.
Okay, it's a beautiful calendar. And we have about 30 of them left. They're going like hotcakes, but we'd like to sell out and sell out soon. So if you haven't gotten yours, you can order yours right now, and I will be delivering this afternoon, so you get prompt delivery.
I want to add, Kate, you don't give enough notice about the other parts of the calendar that are really important and interesting. The list of vendors, the people who have sponsored us, are recommended contractors and suppliers that that we all use, and they are supporting us. They have paid to contribute their information to the calendar, so we want to keep them happy and coming back to Roaring Brook Lake when we need them. So that's another useful piece of information in the calendar.
That and the fact that the theme of this year's calendar was edible plantings. And Lynn, you did a lovely write-up on growing herbs so that you have lots of hints on that. And then Jonathan in his layout with each month did a different plant that's edible too. So you've got a lot of gardening information.
That's
and
right.
then of course you've got some information on your garden club here too. So.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so I think it's just about time for us to begin the program. Jason, I'm going to turn the screen over to you and look forward to meeting the rest of your team.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. Wanted to thank everybody for inviting us here today to talk about the landscaping and the wetland mitigation. I do apologize. You know, while we run our state computers, we don't have the ability to have we don't have any video cameras on our computers, so I apologize for that. You just have our voices, I think. But we're here today to talk about the landscaping and the wetland mitigation. Not many people know, you know, New York State DOT and our design group, we're a multidisciplinary group. So there's, you know, we have landscape architects, engineers, geotechnical engineers, surveyors, and just a whole group of professionals that work on projects like this. But with us today is myself. I'm Jason Wolfhanger. I'm the regional landscape architect here for the Hudson Valley. We have Janae Rolfe. She's the environmental specialist on the project. Mark Crook is here. We may have met on other meetings. He's the project manager. And we have Mike Schaefer. He's our regional design engineer. And I think you met him too at other meetings that we've had for this project. I want to first start talking about the wetland mitigation. And Janae's going to start things off, giving basically an overview of the environmental process and some other permit requirements and things about the permits. So I'm going to hand things over to Janae first. Then I'm going to go over some things on the wetlands, and then we'll go into the general landscaping for the project.
Thank you, Jason. Again, as Jason mentioned, my name is Janae Rolfe, and I was the environmental specialist on the project. I did see some familiar faces this morning throughout the public involvement process. I was present in most of those meetings. So to get started and kind of bring us to what brought us here and why we're building these wetland mitigation areas. As most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the project, the DOT is eliminating the Ackreed crossing of the Taconic State Parkway at Pudding Street. And we're constructing a full diamond interchange, and it's under construction now, as I'm sure many of you have traveled through that area. As part of our preliminary design process, we complete an environmental analysis. This identifies the environmental resources present in the project area. We use this information, it drives the design, and it helps the engineers make more sensitive design considerations. One of the resources we screen for when completing the analysis is wetlands and other waters of the United States. These water bodies are federally protected by the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act prohibits the discharge of dredge or fill material into wetlands, streams, and other waters of the U.S. Unless a permit is issued by the United States Army Corps of Engineers. This Section 404 of the Clean Water Act is one of the permitting programs that regulates what projects can be constructed and impact the waters of the US. So avoid, minimize, and mitigate. In 2018, we completed a wetland delineation for the entire project area. Wetland delineation is basically mapping the boundaries of the wetlands. This was submitted, this was put into a report and submitted to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for a formal approved jurisdictional determination. Approved jurisdictional determination, we walk with the district engineer, we walk the entire boundary, and they approve the boundary that we set for the site. Once we establish the boundaries of the wetland, we then apply the approach, avoid, minimize, and mitigate, the approach to avoid, minimize, and mitigate, excuse me. The Army Corps requires that all appropriate steps must first be taken to avoid and minimize the project's impacts to these wetlands. So for this project, with the existing roads and their proximity to the wetlands, it wasn't feasible to alter the configuration of the road without impacting the adjacent wetlands. So avoiding the wetland impacts completely wasn't something we could achieve. So throughout the design process, we worked with the project engineers, and we, meaning the environmental team, landscape architects, and the project engineers, all worked together to reduce the project's impacts to the surrounding wetlands to the greatest extent possible. When we first started the project, we had close to an acre of impacts, and by sharpening our pencils, tightening up some of those ramps, utilizing some walls and other engineering techniques, we were able to get below 0.4 acres of wetland impacts. So that getting under that 0.4 acres of impacts allowed us to apply for a nationwide permit. We received nationwide permit number 14, which is for linear transportation projects, and it was issued by the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, part of that permit includes compensatory mitigation. When a project has unavoidable impacts, compensatory mitigation is required to replace the loss of wetlands, streams, and other aquatic resources and the functions in the area. Go to the next slide, Jason. So our permit was issued on May 3rd, 2019, and expires March 18th, 2022. And as part of the permit, the amount of wetlands we need to mitigate for. The Army Corps of Engineers determines the appropriate form and amount of compensatory mitigation required. The overall nationwide requirement is no net loss, which is a 1-to-1 ratio. We work with the district engineer to come up with an appropriate ratio based on the projects in the specific area where we are impacting. So we are building 0.75 acres of new wetlands, and I can go into on the next slide how that calculation was, how we came to that calculation a little bit better with the table. As far as the form of the wetland, there are different methods of providing wetland compensatory mitigation. These include like aquatic resource restoration, establishment, which is creating a wetland, enhancement, and in certain circumstances, preservation. Working with the district engineers for this specific project, we are providing compensatory mitigation through establishment or creation. The success of our mitigation areas. The proposed mitigation plantings are to have an 85% survival rate and an 85% rate of hydrophytic plants within the wetland area. And hydrophytic plants are water-loving plants that are indicative of a wetland success. Species. The vegetation should not consist of more than a total of 5% aerial coverage of specific invasive species. And that is something that we identified during our monitoring. And that leads me to the monitoring. The department is required to provide the Corps annual monitoring reports for a period of 5 years after the initiation of the activities authorized by this permit. Once this project's construction is completed, we will complete annual monitoring for 5 years. And lastly, as part of the permit, we are required to put a conservation easement or deed restriction on the wetland mitigation sites to guarantee their preservation for wetland and wildlife resources. And then the next slide, this kind of shows you
Janae, I think we lost you.
can
There
you
we go.
hear me now?
You're back now. Yeah, you were on mute for a minute.
Okay, where'd I lose you guys? Just on this
Starting
slide?
off on the slide.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Cool, good. Okay, so the wetland type. So in this project area, we identified 2 types of wetlands, forested and emergent shrub. The second column shows the permanent impacts the project will have to each type of wetland. The third column shows you that mitigation to impact ratio. And this is where I had mentioned earlier, our requirement is no net loss, and the nationwide standard is 1-to-1. We work with the district engineer to determine what is appropriate for this project. For forested wetlands, we came up with a 2-to-1 mitigation impact ratio for forested and a 1.5-to-1 for emergent and shrub wetlands. That totaled approximately 0.6 acres of mitigation for forested and 0.15 acres for emergent shrub. And over on the right side of the table, you can see how we've broken them down into the wetland mitigation areas. Jason will take over moving forward, and he's going to kind of go through each one of those wetland areas, their type, and more details on the plantings and construction methods. So pass it over to Jason.
Jason, we're not hearing you.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Thank you. Let me start over. So this is just an overview of all of the mitigation areas for this project and where they are. So mitigation area 1 is actually along Pudding Street across from the shopping plaza there. And there's like an adjacent field or a vacant field there. And I have a ground shot of that, and we'll zoom in on each one of these areas, but I just wanted to give an overview of where these all are. Mitigation area 2 is on the northern section of the project in the southbound side. So it's on the northwest part of the project, but it's adjacent to the southbound lanes. Mitigation area 3 is on the southern end of the project, adjacent to the northbound lanes, as you can see here. And I'm just going to go zoom in and talk about each one of these sites now. So here's mitigation site 1. It's going to be a forested wetland. And here's the ground plane view of that area. This is the plan sheet, and I know plan sheets are kind of hard to understand, so we kind of colored this up a little bit to hopefully read a little bit better. But basically, we're expanding the existing forested wetland. In the area, the darker blue, the darker purple, that's the existing wetland. And then the lighter blue or lighter purple is the area that we're expanding to. I don't know if you're used to looking at contour plans. It's just basically our grading plan showing that area. This is the largest of the 3 mitigation areas. This site's a 1/2 acre. Whenever you do wetland mitigation, you need a hydrological source, whether it's a stream or a wetland or something else. And all of our wetland mitigation sites, we're expanding upon existing wetlands, so we're using those existing wetlands for our hydrological source. This graph or cross section is actually showing from here to here. This listed A on the drawing here. The red line shows the existing grade of that area, And the blue line is the proposed grade. So you can see we're removing quite a bit of, we're doing quite a bit of excavation here to achieve that size of a ½ an acre. Also shown on the plan is our hydrophytic vegetation that Janae was talking about. We have a mix of native trees and shrubs, all water-loving plants. And we also have a forested wetland seed mix that we use. I'll go over the plants and the seed mix in the next couple slides, but just wanted to explain what you're seeing here. We also, this line in here, you can't really see too well. We put 4 inches of our wetland topsoil, which is a very high organic topsoil that has to get made for the project. There's a range on it, but it's about 14% organics. With this project, we knew based on the invasive species in the area that using on-site materials was going to cause a problem, because you recall Janae said that we have limits of invasives that are allowed in these wetland mitigation areas. So in order to help us avoid some potential future problems, most of the invasive species in the wetlands out there, if you have purple loosestrife, there's just millions and millions and millions of seeds. So it's too much risk using that on-site material. So we'll be bringing in wetland topsoils for this project. For wetland area A, this is our proposed trees and shrubs. We have pretty good luck with these, using the swamp white oak, American sycamore, the American hornbeam, silky dogwood, speckled alder, winterberry, American cranberry, viburnum, and the gray dogwood. Most of you are probably familiar with most of these. Especially if we're speaking to the garden club now, I'm sure most of you guys are aware of these. The shrubs, we specify those to be 5-gallon containers that will have a 24 inch by 24 inch spread. And the trees will be 1 1/4 inch caliper trees. This is our seed mix. It's a diverse mix of hydrophytic vegetation. It's a mix of native sedges and native herbaceous plants. This mix, we model our mixes off of Ernst seed mixes. I don't know if you know of Ernst Seed Mix Company, but they're kind of like the industry standard for developing different type of seed mixes for different type of environmental applications, whether it's restoration mixes, different wetland mixes. We've been using them for quite some time. But if you look at the plant list here, you're probably familiar with a lot of these. The purple stem aster is very nice, the oxeye sunflower, the Joe Pye weed, turtlehead. I do want to warn everybody, because this happened to me when we first started doing wetland mitigation. If you drive by the site and you see it looks like a soccer field, it's actually the cover crop that's in these seed mixes. The first time I did one of these 15 years ago, we did a very large couple acre mitigation site, and one of the environmental staff in construction called me. They're like, "We think we have a problem. Looks like a soccer field out here." I had called Ernst, and they kind of laughed at me a little bit. They're like, "That's the cover crop. It's basically just an annual rye that they put in there." The reason why they put it in there is just for some sort of soil stabilization, because a lot of these seeds take quite some time to germinate. They can germinations 1 to 3 years before you start seeing some of these. The first things you usually see are the sedges, and then you'll start seeing some of the other things pop up. But not to alarm anybody, if you drive by after they actually do seed this, if you see it looked like a soccer field, just straight up grass, that's the annual ryegrass they put in as a cover crop. I do not have an aerial for wetland area 2, but wetland area 2 is a emergent wetland that we're trying to construct. This is actually expanding on a previous wetland mitigation area that the department created. I'm not sure, it's either in the early 2000s or in the 90s, I believe. But this is just a ground plane view. You can see that white pipe that's sticking in the center. I believe that's one of our monitoring wells, and the environmental staff, after this project's completed, they measure the water levels with, I forgot the name of the tool, but it's part of the monitoring requirements to the Army Corps of Engineers.
Piezometer.
Piezometer, there we go. So here's the plan view for wetland area 2. Again, the light blue, light purple area is the expanded area that we're proposing for this project. In this site, it's emergent wetland. You don't typically plant trees in an emergent wetland. We're planting some shrubs. I'll go over in the next slide, but water-loving shrubs, and also same, we're doing an emergent seed mix from Ernst. We'll be bringing in that 4 inches of wetland topsoil before we seed. In this line, again, this red shows the existing topography, and this blue line is the proposed. So you can see we're having some cut here to get this wetland built. Here's a list of these shrubs in the emergent wetland seed mix. We're using black chokeberry and spicebush for our shrubs. Again, those would be 5-gallon containers, 24-inch by 24-inch spread. A mix again of hydrophytic herbaceous species for the seed mix. Sedges. Here, a lot of these will probably pop up to you. There's swamp milkweed, again, the Joe Pye weed, the monkey flower, the New York ironwood, which is really cool. It's the Veronia that's listed here. The soft rush, I like this too. This shows up right away. You should start seeing this within a few months of them actually seeding the location. This actually is typo in here. This is the blue flag iris. I forgot to mention too the scheduling. The contractor is proposing to construct all 3 wetland areas this spring and have them planted. We have planting seasons. Our spring planting season is March 15th to May 15th. So that's the time frame that they're going to be aiming for to get this complete. Moving on to wetland area 3. Wetland area 3 is again a forested wetland. We have the area shown in the aerial right here. It's on the southern section of the job. Here's a ground plane shot taken. It's pretty much graded. They have to do the fine grading, but rough grading I think is most of the way on this one. As you can see, you can already see in this picture, there's some wet soils in here. And here's the plan sheet for area 3. It's a 1/10 of an acre. I think this is our smallest site. Our emergent wetland was 0.15 acres. This one's 0.1 acres. You can see the area that we're expanding. If you look down in this cross section on the bottom, the red line is the existing grade and the blue line is our proposed grade. We'll be doing the same thing on this one. We have a mix of hydrophytic trees and shrubs and a forested wetland seed mix. This one's a little bit different. We don't have as much diversity because it's a smaller wetland, but here's a list of the trees are the same with swamp white oak, the American sycamore, American hornbeam, and we'll be using the American cranberry viburnum, the speckled alder, and the silky dogwood. At times, I mean, at times the contractor may have issues getting some of the material or in the sizes. We typically work with them and we'll accept in-kind replacements. So as of now, this is what we're proposing. Once in a while, 1 or 2 species will get substituted, but overall, it's generally what we have specified. And here again is the forested wetland seed mix. That's it for the wetland mitigation area, and we can discuss the questions and comments on that, but just like to kind of move over into the general landscaping for the project. The department policy on our parkways is we specified native species whenever possible. This project, we have a diverse planting of native trees. We have 84 trees planted in total at this time. It's common to have substitutions, like I said, based on availability, but this is what we're shooting for. Then we did specify sassafras a little bit large. They may try to get a smaller variety. We'll see what happens. I haven't talked to the landscape subcontractor yet, but the trees for this project in the main line of the general landscaping are specified from 1-inch caliper to 3-inch caliper, depending on the location. We have some steep slopes that we're going to plant on. So anytime we plant on steep slopes, we use a smaller caliper tree. We do that because of the root ball size and the slope. If you use too large of a tree, it kind of the root ball is sticking out and it looks a little bit funny, and we have a hard time establishing them on steep slopes. The smaller trees generally take a little bit faster than the larger trees, so we just use, and they're also easier for the contractor to get them down there without damaging the material on some of these steep slopes, like 1-on-2 slopes. We don't typically specify trees larger than 3 inches due to the transplanting success rates and the stunting of larger trees. If you were to use a 2-inch tree and a 6-inch tree in 5-7 years, they're actually going to be about the same size, because the root pruning that happens on a larger tree when it's getting transplanted puts the tree in such shock. It takes so much time for it to catch up that it's cheaper, easier, and usually more successful using smaller material. All the trees and all the trees on the main line and all the plantings for the wetland mitigation area will have what we call a post-planting care with replacements items on them. For 1 year after they are installed and signed off on and inspected by us, the contractor has to take care of them for 1 year. If they're damaged or die in that 1 year period, they have to replace them. They're responsible for watering the vegetation, pruning, weeding the areas with the plants, remulching, things like that. Before I go over where we're going to put our plantings, I just want to talk about some of the constraints on this project in regards to the planting, because that, it may help answer some questions that you have on, oh, why didn't you plant here? Things like that. Every project, there's a clear zone, and the clear zone is the area that's clear adjacent to the roadway of fixed objects. In areas on a high-speed road like the Taconic State Parkway, when you don't have rail, the recoverable area is typically 30 feet from the white line. So if there's the adjacent area to the roadway, if there's no rail protection, we tend to keep trees offset at a minimum of 30 feet, for the safety of the traveling public. There's offsets for rails, guide rail that's out there and installed. Typically box beam has a 5-foot deflection, so when it's hit, it tends to move about 5 feet. It depends on the post spacing, but that's kind of a general rule of thumb for box beam guide rail. And then I'm not sure if we're using W beam guide rail out there, but that, it can vary, but about 8 feet of deflection. So we have to stay out of that deflection zone of the rail. So areas where we have rail, we have to be 5 to 8 feet behind that to plant trees. As all of you are aware, there's a lot of rock on this project, the west side of the Taconic State Parkway, all the rock blasting that you guys had to go through for this project. That puts some limitations on where we can plant. There's 2 message boards that are going to be permanently installed on both directions, the northbound and the southbound, near the bridge abutments. So we have to have visibility of those message boards and can't obstruct them with vegetation. There's a few stormwater and drainage areas proposed that are areas that limit some of our planting. And then we have the wetland areas that we're already planting. Here's a mix of the trees that we have proposed. A lot of you should be familiar with these. We have the northern catalpa, the American sycamore, common hackberry, sassafras, the shadblow, and the eastern redbud. I'm also going to show this in aerial for those that, you know, it's kind of, sometimes these plans are kind of hard to orient yourself, but I'll try to explain it on the plan sheets. And then I'll go over it again on the aerial at the end, showing where all these locations are proposed for plantings. But this is looking north is to the top of the screen, south is towards the bottom. So, and of course, this is Pudding Street right here in the middle. In the bottom left quadrant here, this is a very steep slope. This is a 1-on-2 slope. We plan to plant 1 inch to 1 1.25 inch caliper trees here to try to help with slope stabilization and try to reestablish some vegetation in that area. This is northeast quadrant. There's this grading here shows a stormwater pond, so we have the opportunity. There's enough space from the guide rail deflection, so we offset some plants. We were able to fit some plants in here. This is the ramp onto the northbound Taconic coming from Pudding Street. This area here, we had an opportunity to plant some trees here. This median, as you can see, like this, where I was talking about for rail, I believe there's rail on both sides here. Once you offset for the deflection, there was really no opportunity to plant. So once that median widens out a little bit, we were able to plant some trees. And I believe there's existing trees here. You can see on the aerial. So I'll show when we get to the aerial where we're planning on putting those trees in relation to those. And then on the east side of the ramp, when you're out there now, if you're taking that ramp to go northbound, you can see there's an area that's kind of graded before the forest line. We'll be trying to reestablish some trees right there. This is along Pudding Street, and the plaza's right here. Our wetland mitigation area 1 will be here. There is power lines through here, but we, you know, between the forested wetland plantings, and then we're proposing to plant some secondary trees here, some flowering trees that are going to stay small enough not to conflict with the wires, so you don't get that ugly pruning by the utility company. So plan on planting some shadblows and redbuds throughout here, and then behind in the forested wetland we'll have some shade trees like the swamp white oak and the American sycamore. So here's an aerial of the project, kind of sometime in middle to late November. But this is it's a little bit easier to orient yourself than those plans. So I'll just go over some of those planting areas again. Now you can see the project area in almost its entirety. We're kind of missing wetland mitigation area 3, but we're planting where we can on that. And there really isn't many opportunities south of this for landscaping, but this is that steep slope that I mentioned that was on the first sheet. This is where we'll be planting the smaller caliper trees to try to help with some of the slope stabilization and to revegetate that area. So we have an opportunity to plant some trees here, which we'll be doing. In this quadrant, this is where you can see the bridge abutment here. That somewhere in this area there's going to be a permanent variable message board. We had to keep the site distance to that, so we're not proposing. There's also going to be a stormwater pond in this area. You can see a little bit. I don't know if they're using that for erosion and sediment control now, or if that's the permanent facility, but this will be a stormwater pond, a variable message board. So there really wasn't an opportunity to landscape in this portion of the project. This is the area along Pudding Street. We're proposing those flowering trees. We're also going to try to tuck in some. You saw that there's going to be a stormwater pond on this side, but we're also going to do some tree plantings roughly around here. We're also planning to plant some trees in this portion right here. And again, this will be stormwater pond. This is the area on the northbound ramp that I was talking about. You can see the tan area, I think, is where they have their straw down, but we'll be reestablishing some trees in this section right here. And this is the wider area, the median that we had an opportunity to plant in. So this is where you see those median plantings. This quadrant limited landscaping as well. You have the new southbound ramp coming onto Pudding Street right here. You can kind of see the access road, I believe, is roughly the alignment of the ramp. And then on the other side of that, we have the rock slopes. And then the area here, we'll have another variable message board somewhere in here that we have to have visibility to. So we really couldn't plant any trees. I don't know if I mentioned it or not. We don't typically plant shrubs on the main line of our highways for a couple of reasons. Either they'll get outcompeted by weeds and things that grow, or if our maintenance guys are going, sometimes they tend to, they're not using Z-turn mowers, they're using tractors with pull behind mower decks. And typically, we've tried it in the past and they end up getting mowed down. The grass can grow high, they don't see it and they just go right through it, or they don't know, they don't specialize in landscaping and things like that. So we typically, unless we have like a mulch bed where we know someone's going to take care of it, we typically don't plant shrubs. We try to stick with trees on our main highways. But that is all. Then you can kind of take over and we can kind of do a question and answer.
Hey, well, thank you so much. This was really fascinating for me. Let's see if I can get our screen back.
You want me to stop sharing?
Yeah, maybe that would be helpful so we can see each other again.
I can always share the screen again if we want to pull up one of the drawings or images.
Sure. I have a question and a comment. I just make a comment to everybody generally that all of these plants are not just going to provide us with a beautiful gateway to the neighborhood, but they're all providing habitat in one way or another, whether it's food, shelter, breeding sites for the natural, the native species that we have here. And so, it's something to keep in mind. It's going to be really a very vibrant place when it's done. My question, Jason, to you is, what are you going to do, if anything, to prevent deer damage? Because we do have a lot of that.
That's something I'll talk to the landscape subcontractor on. That we've had beaver damage before. That's happened in some of our wetland mitigation areas. We could put rodent guards on, but if it comes to buck scrapes, they may also try to put some sort of tree protection on there. But we'll have to work with the landscape sub, and we don't like to keep that on too long because that can have a negative impact on the tree's growth. But while it's getting established, especially for that 1 year, that's a good point that I can bring up to our landscape sub, because they may want to protect those either with that tubing that you see,
right,
or some sort of tree wrap on those.
Okay.
We've had a mitigation site where we had a beaver took out all of our plantings and moved them off site. So I hope that doesn't happen on this one.
I was going to raise the question about beaver, or Lynn raised it about deer, but there are beaver around there. I've seen them. In fact, I saw one swimming down here this morning as well. So maybe just be mindful that there are beaver in that area for sure.
Right. So do you all want to ask your own questions? You've written some into the chat, but maybe you want to speak them out yourself. Kate, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, Jason, that area 3 just seemed a little small to me at 1/10 of an acre. As you're traveling northbound on the Taconic and you look over there, it seems like such a large area with all those dead trees and standing water. And you're just working on 1/10 of an acre there, or more?
It's 1/10 of an acre. I don't know what I'll have to go out and visit the site to know exactly what you're talking about, but maybe it's an area in the existing wetland that has some dead trees, or maybe the contractor did some damage and
No,
Um,
no, they're dead, they're trees that are, the product of beaver flooding.
It's just
Okay.
particularly unsightly, very unsightly, just as you get
Okay,
off
wait,
Main
wait.
Street.
We're gonna talk about wetland ecology. Okay.
Well, Butter, that's the way it looks.
But that's part of what happens when beavers flood the area. The trees can't live. You remember the talk we had 2 weeks ago? The trees those are not adapted to living in a flooded area. So they die, but then they become habitat for other things. It's just part of the way things move. But anyhow, let's move on. Jonathan, you had a question.
Yeah, I'm just curious about the trees you're planning to plant on going on the northbound or by on the on-ramp, northbound on-ramp, because that like abuts a lot of homes we know of. I wasn't sure if you were going to plant like evergreens as maybe a slight sound barrier to prevent if you're planting there, what trees are going in.
we have planned native deciduous shade trees in that area. I can relook at the area again. We were kind of backing up to an existing forest, so I didn't, I wasn't really thinking in terms of screening. I don't think we took down many evergreens in that area, but we could look at potentially adding some evergreens in there. We'll have to go out and
I'm not
views opened up that weren't.
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure which are the best trees for that area, but was just curious.
Yeah, we were planning to reestablish the just bringing back the forest floor a little bit from where we impacted it, but we can look at see if some screening is needed there.
Hey, Ina, do you want to ask your question? No?
You're on mute, Ina.
Okay, well, I can read the question. It has to do with, is there any weeding, especially of invasives, that goes on after that first year, after the contractor leaves? And is there any plan for protection of seedlings? Well, yeah, I already asked about deer. I don't know if we have geese over in that area, but deer are a problem. And okay, so we'll start with that. What happens after the first year?
After the first year, we don't have anything planned. We don't, we have to kind of adapt once we see what's happening while we monitor. We haven't run into issues where we need to weed all too often. It all depends if the invasives come in and become a problem, but we do have them for that 1 year. Usually the plants are pretty aggressive with the seeds, and they can outcompete the weeds trying to come in after that year, but we'll have to see how things go. And if it becomes a real problem, there's different ways that we can go about handling it. If it's another contract that comes in to take care of that, or if it's some other forces. But we don't have anything planned right now beyond that 1 year.
Okay, Nancy's asking if you could put the final slide back on.
I can
Yeah.
a question, Lynn, thanks. So yeah, if you could put that final slide on, I'm just having trouble orienting myself and understanding where the middle of the 3 wetlands is. And also, I have to say, first of all, that it's great to be in a meeting where we're talking about what's happening as opposed to, oh my gosh, the overpass plans have been put off for another year. So it's really great to hear this. And I also, after you show us where that middle wetlands is, Jason, if you could talk a little bit more, you and your colleagues, about what we should expect in the first year or two in terms of what we see, the sequencing. I thought it was really helpful that you told us we're going to see a soccer field for the first, initially, but it would just be great to understand what is likely to be blooming or popping up when. Thank you.
So the first part was, you were wondering where mitigation site 3 was, or where?
Number 2, the middle of the 3.
Number 2. Okay. Yep. Number 2 is in the along the southbound section. I believe it's. Can you see my mouse? I believe it's up here.
Yeah.
In this area up here.
it's very far, it's north of the whole otherwise, what we think of as the project.
Yeah, it's like the very northern limits. It's probably, you see where the blacktop transitions on southbound.
Yeah.
So it's right around there.
Great,
And
okay.
if you
Jason,
drive
would
by
you-
and you'll see a white pipe sticking out of the
Jason,
ground
while
there, and
you
that's where
have
the
this
mitigation
slide
area
up, would you show us the 3 areas? That would be great.
Yes. So this is the forested wetland mitigation area 1. Mitigation area 2, which is emergent wetland, is up in this area. And 3 is just off the screen, just south of us on the northbound on the east side. So it's just south of this area right here.
So Jason, just to highlight where I've seen beaver before, it's down there.
Down here on wetland 3.
Yes.
I'll definitely bring that up to the landscape contractor because they also don't want to, it's in their best interest. They don't want to lose their material they plant. So we'll try to be proactive, and I'll talk to them. And ultimately, it's their risk on the first year of things, but they may decide that's in their best interest to put something out there. I know someone asked about what you're going to see in the first year. The first thing you're going to see is they're going to finish up the grading. Then they're going to bring in that wetland topsoil. Then they're going to, it depends on the order of operations. Sometimes they seed first, sometimes they plant the trees and shrubs first. I like it when they plant the seed first and then put the shrubs in, because sometimes they miss areas, but you also have an issue. It's hard because then they walk over areas they just seeded. So sometimes they seed the area, they will plant the trees, and then they'll reseed a little bit more. And right away, within the first couple of weeks, you're going to start seeing a lot of germination, a lot of green popping up, and that's all going to be that annual ryegrass. But in the first season, maybe in the fall, we'll start seeing that fall sunflower, the oxeye sunflowers, the yellows will start popping up. And then you'll see some taller grasses, and those are the rushes and the sedges. And then in year 2, you're going to start seeing more color in there. Into year 3, they take the herbaceous plants with the flowering, because we're seeding in the spring. They'll start developing that year more so towards the end of the season, and they may or may not flower. It depends if they're fall flowering or not. So you might get a couple asters, but the next season is when you're going to start seeing more color in there. You won't see that annual ryegrass the next year, and you'll start seeing more and more of the wetland plants.
Okay, any other questions?
Jason, can you say something about is there any eradication plan for invasive plants, especially Oriental bittersweet, that are in the pre-existing adjoining wetland areas?
We don't have any plans because we don't have rights to go into those areas, and it's very, in my experience, it's hard when you're up against a monumental task trying to manipulate nature, and you're trying to build a wetland, and these adjacent wetlands all have invasive species in them. There is a pretty high risk that they'll come in. We just hope that our seed mix and our plantings will establish quick enough that they can help outcompete those invasives from coming in. But we don't have plans. Possible DEC has different pilot programs. I know Westchester has a vine coalition along the sawmill of volunteers that go out and try to cut some of the vines and eradicate them as best as they can. Bittersweet, the department actually did a study on bittersweet a few years ago through ESF, the Environmental Science and Forestry School. They got a grant from the department to investigate ways to eradicate Oriental bittersweet. They actually found, they tested versus doing like a glyphosate, like Roundup versus just cutting. The conclusion of the study was that it was 99% effective just to cut, and to do a foliar application only when they start to resprout after the cutting. because it's hard to cut any of the little the things that pop up. That once you cut roots, they'll start to go from the root system and start popping up. So if you do like a foliar application for the first year or two, that has like a 99.9% success rate. That's what that study found. And we've had areas where, like, if it was in, we would have had more invasive species. We do have items to deal with them, but we don't typically use them when adjacent areas are ridden with invasive species. If there's like an isolated area, we've had good success with getting rid of invasive species through multiple different methods depending on the species. We've had wetland mitigation areas that we've departmented with the New York State DEC that has given us biocontrol beetles. I call them the purple loosestrife beetles, and they go out. You release them on site, and they actually eat only the purple loosestrife. And we've used that in a couple of our mitigation areas and have had great success. And I actually presented that 2 or 3 years ago at the Native Plant Conference down in Westchester. Our program for that.
We have the
And that's
beetle. We have evidence.
You
of
have the beetles?
We do, yeah. I don't know how
I
we
didn't
got.
think they would work. And we've gone back to the site the next year for monitoring, and you see them eating the purple loosestrife, and you kind of have to see it yourself. It's kind of like, come on, these things are really going to work, but they do work. We've only actually had one site where they didn't take over, and we don't know why, and DEC doesn't know why, but they didn't establish themselves well. But I think we've tried it in like 10 mitigation areas and had good luck.
And just a question about the geese. The geese won't be a problem once the established vegetation comes in. It's only really for that initial seedling eruption. And we do have geese that are in this area, both flyovers and ones that stay for the summer. And we would expect them to find those soccer fields.
Yeah, hopefully they don't eat the seed bank.
Yeah, they won't
we'll have
be
to see.
as
I haven't had that.
discriminating as you might want, but yeah.
I haven't had that pop up
Okay.
yet on any of our projects as a problem,
Okay.
but we haven't been near, a large body of water, that I can think of like you guys have here. But there won't be, although they're wetlands, there's not always standing water in them.
Yeah.
They have to be inundated or saturated for 21 days or more of the growing season, but that's it. At times where there's, in the early spring with runoff and things like that, you may have some standing water in them, but hopefully they're not prime areas for these geese to come and cause a problem.
Okay.
If it does happen, we'll have to see, what happens at that time. But
Just
we
like the
haven't had that
beavers,
pop
you
up
might
before,
want to
but-
make your contractors aware of it.
Yeah, the geese.
I have a question. Can I be heard?
Go ahead.
Yeah, is there any kind of a replacement policy for the plants that do not survive at least that first year?
Yeah, so at the end of that first year, say they finish, our spring planting season is May 15th. So after May 15th, we'll go out and review everything. If it's all acceptable, we start what we call the post-planting care with replacement period, and that's a standalone item for the contractor. And so May 15th, 2022, before that time, we'll ask that all plants in this project be replaced that are dead or dying or missing.
Right.
They'll also remulch areas. All the weeding should be done, and they're responsible for watering that vegetation and taking care of it, which is really key. That first year is your biggest year. So if we can get them to establish in that first year, that's really the most important thing.
Are you saying they will be watering those areas if we have a dry spell or regularly or?
Correct. Yep. And the landscape subcontractor on this job, they do a lot of our projects. They're probably our best subcontractor in terms of taking care of the material and watering it. They bring down pretty large trucks and they'll have staff of theirs go out and water the vegetation. It's a big investment for them. They've bought all this material and they want to have it successful too, because they don't want to go in there and replace, and everything they have to replace costs them money. So it's in their best interest to take care of it.
Can I come back to Kate Cunningham's question about the 1/10 of an acre in the midst of that rather larger area of dead trees that we have there now? Is that going to be a little oasis of planting with everything else as we see it remaining?
Yeah, I'm not aware of that there's the dead trees, but as Lynn was mentioning, you know, if that area was not a wetland before and the beaver ended up coming in, making it a wetland, those dead trees, even though they may be hydrophytic plants, if they weren't growing that way from the beginning, then that's a shock to their system and they'll tend to die off. But the DEC wouldn't want us going into the wetland with equipment to remove those trees. And like Lynn had mentioned, that's, even though those trees are dead and dying, and that in turn brings potential habitat to something else. It could be that's habitat for the northern long-eared bat or an Indiana bat. You know, the bats like to roost in dead and dying trees. So that wouldn't be something they would want us to do, would be to go in and remove a bunch of dead trees back there in that wetland. But it will be, at first, it'll be a little bit of a shock because there is dead and dying plants all around it. That will be freshly planted trees and herbaceous material. So it will pop out, I guess, a little bit.
Well, maybe over time, Bobby and Kate, the new plant material will screen the dead things behind it, and they'll.
Well, it would be actually good to know that that screening aspect was taken into account when they decided where to place the trees. I don't know if 1/10 of an acre gives you much flexibility, but the placement could be helpful in screening what's behind it and seeing the new stuff from the taconic.
Yeah, anything beyond that area is kind of we're not supposed to go. Nobody, us nor the contractor is supposed to go beyond that certain line that was developed, because that would be more impact to the wetlands and require a larger mitigation area.
Yeah, Jason, I think this is Janae. You just hit it there. A lot of the area that you're speaking of where there's standing water and dead trees is technically existing wetlands, and anything we did in that area would be considered impacting the wetland.
Yeah, it's still functioning as a wetland, even though it's not forest. It's still there.
I have another
Yeah, and
question.
in time, it's likely that you're going to actually get, you know, those initial trees have died, but in time, there likely is going to be other trees that are going to start growing in there and continue being a forested wetland.
Right.
Lynn, there are some questions that I don't know that we addressed. Josh's question, the sound barrier question generally, and it may not be Jason and Janae's work, but how do people go about working with the DOT if sound barrier is our next 25-year mission? Now that we've got this, I think, you know, there are a lot of people who feel the lake community would benefit from some conic sound mitigation.
I know a little bit about it, and Mike Schaefer, Mark Kruk could probably help chime in on it, but as part of the this is a federally funded project, so part of the federal government has a policy regarding noise abatement. So a project where you're changing the alignment or doing a couple other things that triggered a noise analysis is done, and the alignment has changed in this project, so a noise study was completed. I don't believe we're planning to install noise walls, so it must not have met the noise decibels to require or to spend federal funding on a noise wall. If you were to want a noise wall outside of this project, you would have to work with your legislators, and they'd have to get money set aside just for, you know, somehow just for that noise wall that doesn't have any relation to this project. But Mike, I don't know if you or Mark want to chime in on it. I don't know all the rules regarding that, but I know we are required to do that study, and I believe the study showed it didn't meet the thresholds where they would want to suspend federal funding on a noise wall.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing right here is that there was no criteria met that would justify a noise wall being constructed as part of this project. So in order for you to receive a noise wall at this location, it would require an individual special funding request, and that would have to be specific for this. So that would have to be coming from your legislators, and this project did not meet those requirements.
So that northbound on-ramp, which is much closer to the homes, I guess that didn't qualify us for, what you're saying would have been some decibel-based sound mitigation.
No, not with the on-ramp. The traffic volumes on that would be so small anyway. But on top of that, it's really the mainline alignment that is the controlling criteria.
Did that noise study, do you know whether that took into account the acoustic quality of the lake itself?
It's a good question.
The lake does not contribute to the acoustic noise levels created from motor vehicles on the highway.
Amplifies them.
I do not believe that to be correct, but we can look into that in more detail. But even trees do not affect the noise levels coming from the generators, such as a highway. A noise barrier would contribute to reduction in noise levels, but trees or even a lake would not affect noise levels at all.
I think the thing is water generally doesn't absorb the sounds like vegetation and earth absorbs the sound. So what we get all of it, and it travels farther because of the fact that it's a body of water rather than vegetated.
Yeah, and that's an existing condition that we haven't changed. Is the lake or the water levels at the lake. So even it did affect noise levels. We didn't do any modifications that would have affected the lake, but our studies have shown that neither trees nor water affects the travel of sound waves.
We have done projects here or there that have just been noise wall projects that, they did go through that process with their legislators to secure that funding, but they're not too common.
There's questions about the trails on the west side of the Taconic and the rehabilitation of them.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah, the trails that were destroyed during the blasting, will they be restored?
Yeah, the Roaring Brook Trail will be rerouted. I'm not sure the timing of that, but as part of our coordination with parks, we're working in coordination with parks for the design of that trail. So it will be reestablished.
Hey, anything else? Jan, just a comment. I assume that the land where that forested wetland number 1 was acquired by the state. It had been private property. But I assume that you wouldn't be doing any work there if you hadn't acquired it. Is
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was acquired, and then as Janae was stating in her part of the presentation, and she can expand on it, I believe it's deeded as Janae, can you speak to that? It's deeded for it can't be touched, right? It's like forever wild type of thing.
Correct. Yeah, for nature, for natural resource preservation. So that has not been completed yet. That will be done once the mitigation is constructed.
Mhm. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome.
And I have one more question, and it's about after the construction is complete and the plantings have been done and the crews all pull out. We're going to be here. I mean, obviously your subcontractors are maintaining for the first year. As we see, if we see things that are concerned or if we of concern or we have questions, who is our contact? Who is the best person for us over the next 2 or 3 years as these plantings are starting to emerge and we're seeing the after effects?
You can reach out to Janae and I because, as Janae stated that, she'll be doing the monitoring and typically they invite, one of the project landscape architects to go along with them. So, we'll be looking at these sites a few times a year. So we'll be taking notes and we have to actually document our monitoring and what we find and report that to the Army Corps of Engineers. So we take samples of like grid samples from certain locations that we call, okay, this is our monitoring location. And we give them a report back on what the vegetation's doing there and things like that.
Great, thank you.
So we have things in our permit that we have to meet with the Corps and we report to them. So we watch that for a minimum of 5 years, and sometimes, as Janae alluded to, that can be expanded up to 3 more years of monitoring if there's any issues with the permit. So we're out there for 5 to 8 years after everybody walks away, still looking and monitoring the wetland.
The median areas just before and after the overpass are pretty narrow. How are you guys going to get a mower in there? It's sort of locked in with guardrail as well.
We have what you call a batwing mower or an over the rail mower, where there's an attachment onto their mowing equipment or maintenance forces mowing equipment that it's like a hydraulic based arm that will go up and over the rail and go onto the ground, and they'll go along that way. That's typically how they deal with areas with rail and narrow areas like that. They'll probably close a lane and do what they call an over the rail mowing.
Okay, anything else? This has been a wonderful opportunity. I think we're all really kind of thrilled to have been able to have you address this for us. And we're really looking forward to the completion of not just the roadway, but also the plantings. It's going to be beautiful. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you for having us. And we look forward to this spring and seeing this work that we're talking about today getting accomplished.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, we're so pleased, and it really looks like it's going to be a real asset to our community. And you've done it very carefully and thoughtfully.
Okay.
Thank you.
So if Garden Club at Roaring Brook Lake people want to stay on for a while and talk, that's fine. We can leave the meeting open and we'll say goodbye to our guests.
Goodbye and
Bye,
thank you.
everyone. Thanks again.
Lynn, that was great.
All right, Lynn, I'm
Really
going
well
to
done.
stop the recording at this point, right?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Mike. And Mike, I'm going to thank you.